what did you learn about design as a flow? How do you go about it? Looks like Kishore and Madhav could talk forever. So what did you learn about design as a flow?
Lora, for the record, nobody else wanted to answer this, so I'll take it on
Okay,
for the table.
it's a longer discussion to have at the Smithsonian, right?
So I think the simplest thing is going back to Allison's example. Laying the data foundation and connecting, showing the interconnections between different functions is foundational to that.
Yeah, her governance model is foundational. You know, I think a lot of times people will put in the technology without that governance. And, you know, within organizations, manufacturing plants compete for manufacturing, right, products. And, you know, bonuses are made or broken based upon those decisions. So getting finance involved early, getting those models based upon, you know, what the reality is. Her governance model is really something for you to take away. How about, Christine, your table? Any insights to share?
I mean, I think for us, one of the big ones was really starting with the customer in mind and like where you wanted to get to. Because if you didn't do that, you can have all the data in the world and you're still not going to drive the right outcomes.
So clear goals.
Yeah.
And so many projects are started without clear goals. They could be based on a functional role, and you know, the fact that Allison was hired where Medtronic was already started and she had a leader that supported her is key, right? Not only is she very talented, but that you know, combination is a winning combination. Okay, Gilles, anything at your table to share? Okay.
Yeah. To really unlock the power of the data, I believe like we need to build one common data lake across all the across the horizon, like the whole organization level systems, and make the data more authenticated and more trustable, and ensure that the data is structured as a foundation to build on top of it.
So data wrangling, you know, being able to work with data is a really key skill. Okay, anybody else? Alma, at your table, you got anything to share? No? Okay.
There was a couple themes. One is seeing such a phenomenally mature process like they have at Medtronic is almost imposing, I guess, if I'm hearing you. So
yeah, it's sort of like me being on front of CoverGirl magazine, just not going to happen, right? Yeah.
It's, you know, it's impressive on every level.
Yeah.
How do smaller organizations harness that? How do you democratize that type of thing? So I don't think we got any answers.
That's a pretty tall challenge because there aren't a lot of Allisons in the world with her skill level. There aren't a lot of leaders with, you know, the understanding that she has. She also had a challenge with COVID that was extremely important to the lifeblood of the company, and they were very focused. So yeah, it's a great case study. That's why I twisted her arm even though she's pregnant, and she said she didn't really have the time, but we really appreciate her coming. Okay, back table. Yep, Jenny?
Yeah, one I've seen put into place and that I've personally done is starting with a very specific use case that you can get everyone behind, and then you work out a lot of the kinks in that use case. Then everyone understands the flow, is bought into the purpose of the flow, and then you can expand it to that broader horizon that may seem too daunting to begin with.
Right, which is where Brett was when he first called me off of LinkedIn, right? He had this compelling issue. He couldn't get gloves and COVID, and so it was easier for him to get support. So thinking about governance, thinking about architecture, thinking about talent, thinking about the customer, thinking about what is a good model. Wow. Mode, flow, node, governance to inform the engines. Very cool, eh? All right. Let's move on. Let's talk about something else I think is pretty cool. This is your last presentation between now and the Smithsonian when you get drinks and food. So I want to tell you the story of Project Zebra. So you might say, what's Project Zebra about, right? So do you know that biologists used to think that zebras couldn't change their stripes? That a zebra had the same stripes that it was born with, that when it was deceased that the stripes didn't change? Well, the stripes actually change. So that was a big revelation. And as the zebra changes the environment, the stripes change. So the concept of Project Zebra is, can supply chain leaders change their stripes, as a metaphor, as they move from inside-out data, very focused on transactional data, internal data, to outside-in data. So let me just set the stage. It's March 2020. Lora has COVID. She's supposed to be working on the Global Summit 2020, but Regina and I are like, we're just not going to have a summit. And I had call after call of people who are like, how do I use outside data? My demand planning models are no longer good. So I started calling technologists, and I said, now is a great time to build outside-in models. So instead of looking at orders and shipments as the pattern for demand, could we look at multiple signals? Because I'd been doing some work with other companies that showed that 10 to 20 variables were usually needed to go into the models in times of high variation to be able to use outside-in data to be able to give us better signals. And I've been very frustrated that in my 20 years of being an analyst, I've never convinced people to use consumption data. That people assume that the order is representative of demand, and they don't understand the concept of demand latency, and they don't understand the bullwhip effect. And in fact, you've probably all played the beer game. If you've played the beer game, just give me a green thumbs up. Okay, so I have lots of green thumbs. But when we implement end-to-end solutions on ERP, we made the bullwhip effect worse. Have you measured your bullwhip effect? Because there's a methodology to measure your bullwhip effect, to compare the coefficient of variation of orders to planned orders to purchase orders, and to look at how the bullwhip effect changes across the supply chain. Most people haven't done that. So people get together in the room, they play the beer game, they feel really excited, and then they go implement ERP. And I'm like, what is wrong with this picture, right? Because we're amplifying the bullwhip effect and not using outside-in signals in this time of the pandemic. So March 2020, I'm sick. 3 weeks I laid in bed with COVID. Back then we didn't know if we would survive COVID or not. And I kept thinking about my conversations that I'd had along the way with analysts. And there was an analyst by the name of Roddy Martin, who's now dead, who called me when I had COVID, and he said, Lora, we really need to teach people how to use outside-in processes. And I was really sick. I was laying in bed, and Roddy wasn't sick at that point in time. And I said, but Roddy, we never defined those for people to implement. So I got over COVID, and I started calling technologists. And I said, now would be a great time for us to use outside-in data to prove the value proposition of outside-in processes. Because you remember the penguins that I talked about that are on the iceberg that want to know if the seals are going to eat them? They want to use the outside-in data. They're just not sure how. They're not sure what those models look like. And they're not sure of the value proposition. So I started calling my favorite technologist. And I said, let's build outside-in models, and let's test the value of the outside-in model. And the only person who said yes was Igor at 09. So we started Project Zebra, really looking at outside-in models. It is an open innovation collaborative effort. So our goal is that the education and the insights we get from Project Zebra can be used for everybody. So a lot of times people will say, well, Lora, you're independent. Why are you doing this work for 09? It is not an 09-centric project. My goal is that everyone in the technology space can take the results, validate the results, and go build their own outside-in models. I want to change the planning space. So we kicked off the first effort in November 2020, and we had an advisory group, and I started getting people on the advisory group. And it was funny because the people that had been in the industry the longest were pretty cocky with me. You know, I know what this is, Lora. I got the answer, and I'm like, no one has the answer. No one understands what an outside-in process canonical or model looks like, and no one understands what the value proposition is. And so then we chartered the advisory group, and it has educational leaders, it has business leaders, and it has technologists, and we started really working on what would these models look like, and we came up with 9 different potential solutions that could go in the taxonomy of planning. And then we said, let's build training to test our concepts. And we did that off of the first models that we built with BSH and Western Digital. So I'll show you some results from BSH, and I'll talk about Western Digital. And then we used that in the training. So I put on LinkedIn, I'm looking for people to train on outside-in models. And I really didn't know Nicole, who I'm going to bring to the stage at that point in time. But Nicole kept really pounding my inbox. I want to be in this training. I want to be in this training. And somehow we lost her email. And, you know, we put her in as the last person, and I'm so glad we did. And I'll tell you the story about that. So we did the training. We did 3 sessions of virtual training, half days for 3 days, and we constructed experiential exercises. Because just like the backwards bike, my belief was that unless I had a paradigm shift to not think about time phase data, but to think about flow, we would never make the students understand the difference in the paradigm. So we did the river demand exercise, and we did a bi-directional orchestration exercise. And we talked about what that would look like. And the rivers of demand that you saw with the QR codes are from that training. And each of the voices of the people, when you scan the QR codes, are from that training. Then we kicked off a second advisory group, and then we built some code, and we tested more. We tested 2 more case studies, LKQ, which Nicole's going to be representing, and Corning, which we're not done yet, and Deanna can't wait because she's on the edge of her seat. And then we're going to present those results next week. But let's look at an animation of the current state of planning. This particular animation represents a company that is the top of the Gartner best-in-class supply chain. Let's play Islands in the Stream.
When business leaders want to shift to an outside-in process, the first thing that they need to look at is data outside of their enterprise. What we have found is that typically these factors, 20 to 30 of them, can vary over time, but can be much better leading indicators of demand than traditional inside-out signals like orders or shipment history. It's beneficial for companies and business leaders to minimize the impact of distortion in their signals. So getting a outside-in signal.
The river starts with large amount of disparate data, so consumer insights,
Hang on, let's go back.
insights, historical data on the insights from the overall market.
Can you start it again?
As the data moves towards the true river from the streams,
So what
the river
happened?
starts with
Go ahead.
The river starts with large amount of disparate data, so consumer insights, on customer insights, historical data on the insights from the overall market. As the data moves towards the true river from the streams, it tries to get regulated, but it overflows, and it creates a lot of turbulence. It creates a lot of opportunity for gaming the system. Then we move to places where we try to organize, segment the data, but we are never able to connect it end to end, and so the segmentation becomes an empty exercise. And as the data flows further and further downstream, the water gets muddy, the intersection, the responsibilities of where the data should be flowing gets unclear. There are functional silos focused on the individual optimization of costs, like the manufacturing plants, do not look at the end-to-end supply chain. And finally, all these overlays of decisions upon decisions reach the procurement department, which is like a little house on the prairie operating against different incentives and in different horizons. Root cause analysis. My point on RCA was, it was such a pivotal point a lot of organizational effort into actually a structured blame assignment. So it was not looking for, the objective was never to find a true root cause. It was to prove the root cause is outside of my function. It's basically like, how can I make it a demand root cause? How can I make it a production root cause, right? That's when the game bug stops. Nobody tries to look for a real root cause because they don't connect end to end again.
So we talk end to end, and many people think that S&OP is the answer, but this S&OP is gated by finance and the budget. There is no design of flow in this particular company. There's no tactical plan in the supply horizon. And the gaming happens cross-functionally, both bias in the demand, because we are gaming the system between sales and operations and between manufacturing and procurement. Now notice there is no planning system to help procurement to have a buy plan. And notice that contract manufacturing is on an island connected with Excel spreadsheets, right? And also that the water gets really dark and dirty and hard to navigate as we go downstream. So the goal here was to help people to see that it's a river. We need to navigate the river. We need to be able to drive the river into bi-directional orchestration and rethink planning. So the first test we did was on demand-driven forecasting. And a lot of times people will say, well, an outside-in process is just about demand. No, it's not. It's about channel signals, logistics signals, and supplier signals. But the first case study we did was on demand-driven for BSH. We found that BSH, which makes Bosch and Thermador appliances, great appliances out of Munich, the furthest along that I know of in a concept called DDMRP, which DDMRP is anything but demand-driven. It's working on an order pattern. We found that the distortion here is 49%. Remember when I talked about with the bullwhip effect? And the market latency, so the time for a signal to change in the market, for them to see it in an order was 7 months. So they went on allocation too late. Their demand latency for Home Depot was 2 weeks. So 7 months plus 2 weeks, so we have 7.5 months. But their process latency, once they got the data to the organization, was 4 weeks. Collaborative sales planning, S&OP planning. So their ability to make a decision based upon COVID was 8.5 months after what was happening in the market. And this is really what we have today because we're inside out, and we're not really considering latency, and we're not really looking at distortion. So our historic view of a plan is I have an input, I have an engine, and I have an output. I'm sorry? We'll get there. Hang on. So I have an input, I have an engine, and I have a plan. And most people that talk to me and brief me want to improve the engine. They got better math. Great. What people are not looking at is the pattern of the data coming in. Is it forecastable? What is the best way to model that data? What is the pattern telling me about the data? What are the right inputs of the data? Most people just want to implement, just get that technology in. I'm sure if I get that technology in, I'm going to have a better plan. But most people don't know what a good plan looks like. They don't understand forecast value add. They're not used to the discipline of looking at forecast value add and demand, or looking at schedule adherence and manufacturing scheduling, or thinking about, do I have a good plan? We're implementing technology really without looking at how do we best use the inputs and what is a good plan. So the concept of Project Zebra is that I will build a planning master data layer, and the planning master data layer has all of the data around lead times, lead time variation, conversion rates, inflation rates, And then I'll have multiple inputs that'll change in relative importance. So I was doing some work for an agri-sciences company that had 30 inputs that changed over time. And then instead of having an output for a planner, the output will actually go to business leaders. I'll reduce the load on a planner and change the governance model, so I'm going to basically enable business leaders to make their decisions. So that is the high-level goal of Project Zebra. Now play the second animation. So the first animation is representative of the current state. The second animation represents kind of our idealistic goal of what we're trying to build. So let's play the Here Comes the Sun.
When business leaders want to shift to an outside-in process, the first thing that they need to look at is data outside of their enterprise. What we have found is that typically these factors, 20 to 30 of them, can vary over time, but can be much better leading indicators of demand than traditional inside-out signals like orders or shipment history. It's beneficial for companies and business leaders to minimize the impact of distortion in their signals. So getting a outside-in signal minimizes the bullwhip and the corresponding impact of inventory and lost sales by seeing those in a much future-oriented perspective. Companies will find outside-in market data much more effective because the distortion and latency is much lower than inside-out signals like shipments and orders. The impact is lower bullwhip on the company, which has a corresponding impact on inventory and lost sales. Well, orchestration is a key concept of outside-in thinking. And the key concept is that you are synchronizing your decisions based on inputs from your customer's customer to your supplier's supplier, anchored on a balanced scorecard. The balanced scorecard is a scorecard to make sure that the decisions that are made are aligned to the core outcomes that are not just functionally oriented. Outside-in concepts are structured in a way that allows business leaders to be synchronized in their decision making. So it forces companies not to look at just their functional domain, but to look at decisions and have common visibility, synchronized visibility across the end-to-end supply chain. It ultimately allows them to make better decisions that are aligned to the key balanced scorecard metrics. Well, in this picture, the demand is not distorted by functional stakeholders that manipulate demand either through political gaming or other constrained processes like budgeting. In this particular example of outside in, the stakeholders work together on an end-to-end democratized view of demand and make decisions that are anchored on a balanced scorecard. First and foremost, for business leaders, it will deliver positive outcomes. Process is very focused on enabling synchronization across key stakeholders in the business to a balanced scorecard and using this concept of bi-directional orchestration to make decisions at the speed of business. It also will allow them to capture market opportunities much more effectively as they become available in the marketplace.
So in this Project Zebra work, we've defined 7 capabilities that we think need to be built into software. One is outside-in demand planning, which looks at these market factors and really evaluates collinearity and adjusts over time and has an informed model. The second is the planning master data layer that I talk about here. The third is a demand visibility signal that allows people up and down the river to see their view of demand. So Matthew could see a logistics demand signal, and Jenny could see a manufacturing demand signal, and somebody else could see a distribution, but that is role-based and allows what-if analysis across the roles. The fourth is the ability to have the design layer that Allison's talking about into a unified data model that allows us to continually design the flow and to build a unified data model across planning systems, because DRP has nothing in common with transportation, contract manufacturing has nothing in common with manufacturing in today's models, and you have all of these models running without really any kind of governance. The last is bidirectional orchestration. So this is a model for bidirectional orchestration. A lot of times people don't know what bidirectional orchestration is. So it basically goes across source, make, deliver, sell, sales and marketing, and says, how do I best orchestrate the flow of the river, right? And so you had that wheel, and what's happening is we're learning, and we're looking at choices that we could make based upon optimization insights, but also understanding the variation of data. Should I ship to an alternate channel? Should I change demand shaping policies? Because demand shaping will take 4 weeks to read, and most of the time we're shifting demand, we're not shaping demand. What's my allocation strategy? Should I change complexity, like I talked about the 33 types of carrots that Campbell's had? Do I shift portfolios, like Rick was talking about with Clorox? What is the implication of complexity? Do I go to alternate distribution? Do I change push-pull decoupling points with postponement? Do I do alternate routing? Do I do alternate bills of materials? Do I do alternate sourcing? Do I do a reverse bill of material? Do I insource or outsource? So the concept is I design that flow, because I can't pull the levers unless I design it. And then how do I have an informed unified data model to be able to manage that? And then how do I bring these signals in to make these choices that I can understand baseline demand or market potential and plan feasibility based upon a planning master data layer, which looks at lead time variability, changes in calendars, changes in commodities, inflation, replenishment policies, etc. So Nicole was in my training class. Come on up, Nicole. And Nicole was a great student. You know, I love Nicole because she just tells it like it is, right? Nicole is from LKQ, and she had just gone to LKQ when I first met her on LinkedIn, and she said, Lora, what is this? I don't quite understand it. And she volunteered to do some testing. So tell us about the LKQ pilot. And tell them a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah. So Lora tries to introduce always LKQ as the Amazon for spare parts. But trust me, no garage would buy from Amazon because we deliver 4-8 times a day. So we are Europe's largest automotive spare parts provider. So, and our business model is quite easy. It's not complicated. We buy parts, we store parts, we distribute parts. But the problem we have that we are quite complex because we are talking about 1.4 million different spare parts across models. There is a difficulty of finding the right part. Therefore, we're also struggling with returns. And I joined LKQ end of January this year, signed up for the training, attended in March. And at LKQ Europe, I'm the global business partner for supply chain.
So tell us about the testing that we did. So you want to move through and tell the testing? Because when you did the training, you're like, I don't quite get this, Lora. But what caused you to really get it?
So maybe how we started, how this idea basically came across was I attended the training. At the same time, the Ukraine war started. We have still the pandemic going on. We had a lockdown and people were staying at home. And today in the UK, we are having 10% and hitting inflation. We have energy problems. And this all suddenly came when we just started. So it's not an insider information when I share that. Of course, it was also on the agenda in our executive team meetings. And the problem we wanted to solve is, okay, inflation is coming. Should we do forward buying? How much? Which products? Will we sell more? Will we sell less? And this was exactly at the staff meeting. The staff meeting was on Tuesday. The training was on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then we got that bidirectional orchestration idea. And when you look at it for the very first time, it seems to be complicated. And what we did now through the test is putting facts and figures to it and really guiding you through this kind of concept. So the question was, or if we say inflation is linear, it would be easy to solve. We would say, well, stock as much as you can, buy just inventory, because that's net margin, we will just continue selling. And this is not so easy, and that's why this bi-directional orchestration actually is one of the main levers for our business, because which product will we sell more or less? And there are conflicts, and just by common sense thinking. If inflation goes up, will people buy less cars, more cars? They will drive their car longer. At the same time, our suppliers are not sleeping, and they also hit by inflation and raw material price increase. So when are they going to increase their prices? So we went through that exercise by trying to figure out what is our best guess, using outside signals for sensing demand, because historical data is not reliable for us anymore. And then, what does that mean, and how can we better predict the price increase or supply changes? So that was basically the exercise.
So let's go through the slides and tell them the results, because it's a great story. So here's your network.
Yeah, you see it's not quite complicated. So we are operating with branches. That's our main channel. We also sell to big key accounts. We also sell business to business, business to consumer, online sales. But mainly, we have a central warehouse. This test pilot was conducted in Germany. We have one CDC in southern part of Germany, and then we supply 180 branches on a daily basis. And then from these branches, we supply to customers.
And what was the problem here?
The problem is that we did not know that we were forecasting something which we found out through that pilot is not forecastable. So when we first saw the figures, there are two reactions to it, and I'm very honest because both happened. The first one was when we showed that our branches, SKUs, are not forecastable. The first reaction was, Nicole, are we doing that pilot to show that we're stupid? Or the second reaction was, and this was a German guy, so I'm particularly excited about that reaction. He said, that's exciting. Why is that so, and what do we do about it? And we were actually trying to figure out, okay, what you see here in the very first column is, this is how we currently forecast. Then the performance with it. So we are having a forecast value add of 8%. What does that mean if you wouldn't do any forecast? It's the baseline. And then what we do with our systems, we have a forecast value add of 8%. Then we said, okay, let's maybe change the statistical model. And we ended up with 9.9%. And then we started sensing outside data and trying to figure out which ones correlate more or less to our sales. And here we have the big increase. We're talking about 17.3% forecast value add. And then saying, okay, what does that mean in the discussions we are having? We saw the bullwhip in our organization, and we could see through the different models how it's being reduced from 48 down to 37. And you might think that this is not so much of a big increase, but if you think of 1.4 million SKUs and you extrapolate these figures, this is quite significant. And maybe one insight or one reflection on when presenting this data, this was never perceived as a data science project, never. This was maybe at the beginning when we tested and collected data, but automatically the questions or the why questions appeared or came up from management team. Why is that so? What can we do about it? When you see the bullwhip effect of your own supply chain, the question is, why is that? So it triggered not a root cause analysis, as we just heard in the river of demand, but really curiosity in the organization, what we can do. Because our leadership team experiences roller coaster logistics, and now we saw the figures for it.
So let's talk a little bit more about this, because I want to be sure I answered Kishore's question. Because he'll hold me accountable, and, I got to answer it. So you were forecasting the branches and the CDC. The branches were not forecastable. You didn't know that. But the branch forecast was very different than the CDC forecast, and you didn't know that either, right?
We had a bias. Yeah.
Well, you had bias, but they were very different forecasts that weren't synchronized at all, right?
Yeah.
And the positive bias was pretty big, right? We're not necessarily going to put that on the slides. But the bullwhip amplification is the coefficient of variation analysis between the orders and the purchase order, because we're looking at the procurement buy plan, and the comparison of the coefficient of variation across that stream. And we can give you the math behind it. And what we've done is work to put this in the software so the guys that are flying the blimp up and down the river understand the bullwhip effect in real time based upon the products they manage and the time frame that they manage it. And they also understand the forecast value add. Most people are not aware of how the solution is doing on forecast value add and the coefficient of variation. So what was it like to work on this pilot?
After now reflecting on it, I would say I would not know how to do a planning project differently anymore. That's one reflection. So we as a business do not have another choice than changing stripes, simply because that business is not forecastable. It would be useless to spend more time in optimizing the enterprise model, the statistical models. There is a limit to it, and we clearly showcased it. That was one of the reflections. I wouldn't know now how to continue without this. Another reflection is that what I appreciated about it is that it's a business-driven, outcome-driven pilot. So when we first presented this forecast value add methodology to our regional COO, he said, but what's the value add really financially? What is it? So the discussion was always business-driven, and then you show a balanced scorecard and you say, look, this is your logistics impact, this is your procurement impact, this is your inventory impact, this is your cost of goods sold impact. And these are the discussions, very fact-based, which we can have after this pilot now. And there are these aha moments. So it's not about technology. It's not about a planning process. It's not about if it's IBP or SNOP. No, it's about driving financial decisions. And like the speakers before said, you have to show the numbers, and then you get the buy-in.
So you actually had days of inventory and inventory turn results, and they're pretty stellar, but we can't necessarily put them up on the screen. But you can see LKQ's results in the supply chain Stoudemire. They were at 2.6 on inventory, and so versus their peer group. So let's bring Dean up to the stage now. We'll give the slide, have a seat. So we had a person that dropped out of the pilots based upon the work, and I asked Deanna if she would come in and step in at the last moment with Corning and test similar concepts. By the way, I just want to go back, and this was Nicole's lead time variation, just so you can look at it. Most people put lead time in and change it, but what we did in bidirectional orchestration was we looked at lead time variation and inflation for the buy plan. So Deanna, let's talk about the work at Corning.
Great. No, thank you, Laura. So I'm Deanna Denton. I am an IT director at Corning. I manage the global supply management group. I manage their entire investment portfolio for technology. And I partner very closely with the business, particularly our planning COP folks, to just make sure that they have the right processes, strategy, and technologies to enable strategy. And as Laura said, Project Zebra needed another participant, and so my team kind of raised their hand. I'm really proud of them to say, hey, we'd like to be part of that research. We realize that there are gains to be had in planning if we self-disrupt ourselves and educate ourselves on this outside-in kind of view. So the group of our business divisions that volunteered was called Optical Communications, and so I'm not sure if most of you have heard of Corning, but we are a material science company. We've been in business over 170 years. Most of you have products in your life where Corning is behind that product, whether you have an iPhone and you have Gorilla Glass on it, or you have some of our high-end TVs, or you just use a 4G or 5G network somewhere in the world, we're most likely one of the key players behind it. And so this particular division focuses on optical communications, which is fiber optic cable that supports big data center setups, wireless network communication, and the whole trend behind work from home and broadband, right? So they're very busy. We're feeling a lot of growth. We, like other organizations, are feeling the challenge of rapid growth and accurate forecasting. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure is if there was an opportunity, this is just, I just mentioned what we do in terms of just wireless networks. I just wanted to show you that data centers, big, the home, the rural areas, fiber optic cable to the home. I actually live part of the time upstate New York, and I actually have faster internet up there because I actually have the fiber optic cable to the home, and it's not on my street yet in Brooklyn. So, which is really weird, right? But you see how our guys are everywhere, and this is really kind of part of where the world is going, is getting access to everyone, because even kids in school, people who work from home, all of that is kind of coming together. So in terms of the business challenges, that the team was facing, and they said, hey, Lora, this is a great idea. Let's figure this out. Because we're not happy, just like a lot of folks are not happy with their forecasting results. We all end up with back orders, or we end up with surges in inventory in certain categories, and we're trying to understand and self-disrupt and say, what would have to be true for us to do better, right? So the concept of just saying, not just looking at internal data, but saying, can we get more accurate and consistent with an overlay of external data, and outside-in kind of data and process transformation. So that was kind of the impetus and the baseline. And so they raised their hand, and one of my favorites, Mihal, who you work closely with, says, hey, Deanna, I'm all excited. Laura called us. Let's do this. So we've been providing our data to the team. They've been looking at it. We've been bracing ourselves, and we get the full readout on Friday.
Yeah.
And so we're excited. We're like little kids on the night before Christmas. But in the meantime, there have been lessons learned. The team is saying, wow, the questions that they asked made us realize that although there's a lot of handoffs between silos, there's not as deep and integrated knowledge and insights and understanding of the assumptions upstream and downstream of everybody that's bringing this data together and trying to forecast. So they said one of the most insightful things is learning as they try to answer some of the questions of the research and explain their forecast methodology. Although they were told things from commercial, things came downstream they didn't really understand. They've been getting deep into how we set the pricing in Vendavo, or how we use our Salesforce data to kind of shape the plan, and then how we put that into the planning models that the planners use, some of which are way too basic, right? And they're starting to realize that, to say this forecast, error methodology is not telling us, and it's not performing to the way that we want. So we are going through, I would call a continuum of maturity, whether it's a basic forecast error to a MAPE to getting to these newer concepts, which forecast value add, coefficient, right? So it's like we're trying to transfer and get ready to be grown up, so to speak, in this maturity continuum, and it's not easy. So we're excited about Nicole's learnings, and we're hoping to, have our eureka moment, an epiphany this week as well, and to apply that to change how we work, how we design these jobs, how we make sure that people work as a group, how the methodology evolves to a much more sophisticated view of just toggling between all the levers that Laura shared on that slide around all the outside-in parameters that we can tweak to really optimize performance and outcomes. This area is highly underrated in terms of the complexity, right? And so that is one of the things that concern me, to say, hey, we got to make it easier. We got to train people, get them up to speed, really train them in the model, and help them, meet the challenges of tomorrow.
And I think we've done a lot of training. We're not there on the results now. We're going to send Deanna to the virtual room, and we're going to keep Nicole here so that we can ask questions. So Regina's going to whisk Deanna to the virtual room, and Nicole's going to stay. So what questions do you have for Nicole about her testing and her experience? Let's move mic to, yep, thank you, Alex. Can you hold the mic? Yeah, good.
Can you talk about the market signals that you're putting in today to build the intelligence of, assessing the right capacities or forecast?
So we had a set of 26 market drivers. We selected them basically on common sense. Yeah? So of course you have car registration. We also took COVID cases, temperature, Google mobility, inflation, income, all these sorts of things. Also some industry-specific ones. And then we were testing the correlation of each of them.
And so we ended up with 4, so we had to throw out a number because of collinearity, and we tested to see which set actually fit. And then future work is to look at how that fit changes over time, because the outside-in model will change over time based upon the drivers.
Okay. So if you want to understand the customer behavior, probably like what's your thoughts on that? Like how do we able to break down that piece to build some kind of intelligence?
So if we understand the customer's customer, so she's a distributor.
Okay.
So her customer is a garage. So she doesn't really, she's got the person that brings the car into the garage. We haven't really tested multi-tier yet.
Okay.
Okay. Want to pass the mic? Anybody else? Because, Nicole, when we were doing this training, you kept saying to me, but my organization wants to focus on basics. How do I convince them to not focus on basics? So how would you answer that question now?
Well, I saw today the slide of Western Digital where they said it's the old-fashioned end-to-end view.
Uh-huh.
So I thought this is already a basic then for Western Digital. So it's a different concept. So if we now start into evolving or developing planning processes, and it just doesn't match. So would I go again and implement an ERP system which develops an MRP-based purchasing proposal if I can do supply sensing? No. So why do I then implement an MRP in an ERP system? It's simply not possible because it's contradictory. And what we haven't mentioned here now in the slides is we didn't just do the demand sensing part, but we were also testing on a supply side what would happen if. So what would happen if I have a purchase price increase of X? What would happen if I do a forward buy? And these kind of decisions would be, if I would think of a traditional process